Good morning, everybody. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the May 23rd, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website, or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You also have the option to listen to the meeting live via phone by calling 855-925-2801 and entering the meeting code 7030. As with all agenda briefings, we do not take public comment during this meeting. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning, everyone.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everyone.
And then for our staff, City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning.
And City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm now going to turn it over to our City Manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning again and welcome to our agenda briefing meeting. We have a lot to cover and highlight items that will be scheduled for Council's May 28th work session. But before we begin, just a few announcements. City administrative offices will be closed this coming Monday, the 27th, in observance of Memorial Day. The next one is next week, beginning on Wednesday, May the 29th through the 31st. We will start emergency preparedness training. If you have not already signed up, please do so. You have the opportunity to sign up on the 29th, the 30th, or the 31st for that training. Very important. So I'd now like to turn it over to Ben Woody, who will review the work session agenda. So Assistant City Manager Ben Woody. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. And again, good morning, Mayor, members of council. I am going to review our agenda for the Tuesday, May 28th meeting. So I'm going to dive right into that. You have one proclamation for this meeting. It is Asheville's 12th annual Pollination Celebration Month. So we'll be doing that again. On our consent agenda item, I'm going to cover a few items. And if you have questions or would like me to cover anything I skip over, please just let me know. So I'm going to start today with item D on consent, which is the approval of a contract to move forward with the city's solid waste master plan. This planning effort was funded by council in the FY24 budget, and the purpose of it is to evaluate our solid waste management system and program, and to try to provide short and long-term recommendations to improve the efficiency and quality of those programs, as well as increase our waste reduction efforts. And for this particular planning effort, sanitation staff did provide an overview of the process and the scope to Environment and Safety Council Committee at their November meeting. So again, really excited to see that process moving forward. I'm going to move down to item G, G1 and 2. Item G is a resolution accepting $154,000 in grant funds for the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program. And just to be clear, that's a program that's intended to reduce drug trafficking in areas where drug-related activities are having a significant harmful impact. APD acts as the fiduciary for that grant, and the grant's focus is only on cases that deal with trafficking, manufacturing, or the distribution of illegal drugs. not simple possession cases. Councilwoman Roney.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a procedural question, and I'm hearing this from the public. I think it's probably a good idea. And so I'm going to try to make this request and be consistent with it, is that when I have a concern about a consent agenda item where there's going to need to be like questions for the staff, or that I'm anticipating there might be public engagement around it, that I might go ahead and ask at our agenda briefings to pull it off so we could put it either in old business or new business for review. In this situation, I would be asking for a separate vote. So I just think that it's my responsibility when those questions are coming up for me about our budget priorities and the kinds of ways that we spend our resources to implement budget plans and policies. This is a situation where I would suggest that this come off the consent agenda and be considered under old or new business.
I'd just like to ask a question. Your concerns, you said that the concerns of the community as well as your concerns, maybe you can just give me a little more background as why you would be concerned about monies being put in our community to help high traffic to prevent, the expansion of drug use.
Well, if it was really truly about prevention, then we would probably be working with community health workers, peer support specialists, doing a relational response that would prevent this kind of activity in the first place. But from what my studies have shown and best practices for preventing drug crimes in the first place, this is reactive after the fact and historically targets BIPOC, Black and Indigenous person of color communities. But also it's a matter of budget priorities, and I would love to be doing some crime prevention work instead of crime response work, especially when the outcomes usually result in, for example, more traffic stops. So those are the kinds of like consistent questions I've had about the HIDITA over the past 4 years. So the conversation isn't new, but by just flowing through the consent agenda, we don't end up having those kinds of deeper conversations. And what I'm hearing is that when I've been waiting just to pull it off of the consent agenda in the meeting, it's unfair to staff that may be able to provide more of a presentation on the why, but also it makes it so that the public doesn't have as much opportunity to engage as to say if we were to have that conversation in old or new business.
Okay, now only thing I want to say is, I think that in light of the large scape of the things that we have to deal with the drug issue, I think we need to have all kinds of ways. I think there's a need for all kinds of activities to work together to prevent it. I don't think there's one or the other or either or. I think there must be a big spectrum of ways to attack it. And I look at this as only one way that's attacking it. And your way is also another way, but I don't think it should have anything to do with funding that's provided to actually, forward their agenda.
And I think this is an excellent example of the kind of conversation that we could be having in the public sphere if we were planning ahead for these kinds of conversations to be had at the council level at a deeper level as far as like strategy and planning. But it doesn't really happen in the consent agenda. And I've just been trying to think about a better way that I could ask for this kind of item, not to just be pulled off and be a yes, no vote on a consent agenda item, so that we can hear exactly what you're suggesting as far as that sort of like ecosystem of response.
Deborah, did you want to say something? Because I'd like to speak to the process piece of it.
Sure. I would like to say that this went through committee. Environment and Safety Committee had a discussion on this and other grants. So it has had some discussion about the role, also that this is a collaborative effort. This isn't just the city of Asheville. There are state, federal, and it's multi-jurisdictional in scope. And again, our role is a fiduciary. We're pass-through and ensure that funding and needs that are identified, that they are appropriately compensated in terms of those jurisdictions for their work. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a very important part. The consent agenda has things that are just, we're only a fiduciary in this. We're just accepting money. We do this all the time. And, I don't mean disrespect Councilwoman Roney, but if we pulled every single item off the consent agenda that you wanted to vote no on and had to deal with them separately when it's going to be a 6-1 vote, it would require us to put them on other places on the agenda, take public comment, and it would make the process very burdensome. So I don't think it's fair to the rest of council to indulge one council member who wants to vote no on anything and everything that has to do with the police department, just so that you have that opportunity when this is really a routine matter. So I'm not inclined to pull it off the consent agenda as well.
I appreciate that that's the decision of the city manager and the mayor's position. I'm offering this as an opportunity for us to have deeper conversations and look forward to other ways that we might continue to do that.
Hey, moving on, I'm going to cover item I next, and we've done this a few months or several months ago. We did a similar action, but I just want to make sure that council and the public understand. So item I is an approval of revenue bonds that will be issued by the Asheville Housing Authority, and those bonds will support 156 unit affordable housing development in Weaverville. Which, yes, is unusual that we're taking action on an item that's happening in Weaverville. But the reason that is the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, requires that any bonds issued by the Housing Authority must have the financing plan approved by City Council. So that's what this action is. So while the City Council is approving the financing plan, that approval does not require or necessitate any city resources to go towards this project, nor does it have any fiscal impact on the city of Asheville. So again, this is kind of a transactional item, but I just wanted to make sure council had awareness of it. And again, we did similar action some months ago. Councilwoman Turner.
I just want to make sure I understand. So there is no impact to our bond ratings or anything. This is not our financing model. We're just endorsing theirs. Is that correct?
Correct. And I would invite Brad or Tony, if there's anything that I've missed or should be added, ask them to do that now.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I can comment on that. That is absolutely correct, Councilmember Turner. This has no effect whatsoever or obligation placed upon the city's financial bond issuance or other budgetary implication. We are simply providing a thumbs up as a purely procedural requirement since the Housing Authority is within our jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. So those are the items that I was planning to cover under consent. Are there any other questions or any other items that council would like to discuss? Councilwoman Turner.
Just briefly, I wanted to make sure I can't get the documentation around I think it's B, the Design Review Committee. That's specifically just to align the terms. There's no change to the seats or the seat criteria or anything like that. It's just the term.
That is correct. That is to align the terms.
Okay,
and that was
thanks.
something that we probably should have done the first go round, but didn't catch. So it's really just a cleanup item.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, if there's no other questions on consent, move forward. So next on your agenda is presentations and reports, and we have two items. One is we're recognizing two employees at the meeting. One is Jonathan Ballard, who is an operations manager in Public Works, and he recently received a very high profile and a very distinguished award from the American Public Works Association for the work he's doing in our stormwater program. So we want to recognize Jonathan. We also want to recognize Promise Bozeman, who has recently moved over, and we want to recognize Promise for her great work on the CALA program and what she's done to lead and manage that program. So really excited about those two employee recognitions. The other item, and we're gonna talk about this more later in today's agenda, but we're gonna have Jay Dundas kind of leading an update on capital projects and their quarterly CIP update. As council's aware, we've done that quarterly. And of course, we're going to discuss that more today under other issues and updates. And Ms. Campbell.
Yeah, just briefly. I hope that you all will give me a little bit of grace on the manager's report, because it has been a couple of meetings since I've provided one. These employee recognitions are extremely important to me, and they are to the employees who receive this acknowledgement. So greatly appreciate it, because I may be adding another group of employees, our firefighters who help with some flood relief in Texas again. I just want to recognize those employees as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. And I'll echo that sentiment that our employees really do appreciate these recognitions. So moving on to public hearings. We have 3 public hearings for this meeting. Your first item under public hearings is the required operating and capital budget public hearing for fiscal year 2025. This is another item. We have Tony McDowell here today. So Tony's going to provide more information on this item under our other issues and updates section a little later this morning. Public hearing item B is a conditional zoning. This item was actually continued from your February and March council meetings, and it's a proposed CZ for 21 London Road. And what it does is allow the construction of a new 6-story building with 208 units of multifamily housing and associated amenities. This project is requesting a number of technical modifications for dimensional and landscaping requirements. And finally, the TRC and planning staff are recommending approval of the request, and Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval at their February meeting. Any questions on public hearing item B? Okay. Public hearing item C is an item I'm excited about. This is, we don't always see a lot of this, but it's an adaptive reuse project, which is really, as a planner, those are fantastic, and I love to see this. Item C is a conditional zoning at 57 Mack Street, and it allows the adaptive reuse of a church, of an existing church, into 3 residential units. So the property currently is occupied by the vacant church building. It was previously acquired by the Preservation Society, which they do that with properties and structures with the intent of protecting those structures from demolition, which they've done. So now there's a applicant that's prepared to move forward with the redevelopment or adaptive reuse of this building. And so what this conditional zoning does is, number one, it provides several technical modifications that are needed to make the project work, but also it allows for, again, the adaptive reuse of the building, and ultimately it preserves this historically significant structure. So this item went to Technical Review Committee and Planning staff, both of whom recommend approval, and Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval at their May meeting. Any questions on item C? Council Member Mosley.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to state now how pleased I am about this particular project. When I was a little girl, I used to sometimes attend services in that church, used to play in that area. I just want to point out that the neighborhood is thrilled with this project moving forward.
Thank you for those comments. Go ahead, Councilwoman Kilgore.
I was just going to say I would echo that too, because that property has always been, a lot of investors have actually been trying to buy it and switch it over to a high-end real estate project. So I'm happy to see that they were able to utilize it for the community. And so I'm definitely in support of it. Thank you.
Great, thank you for those comments. So moving on under unfinished business, this is an item that you have seen before, council has, and staff is bringing this back to City Council for its consideration. And we've been able to work with the community facilitator that was identified for the contracting opportunity, or the consultant that was identified for that. We've also worked with the block community to ensure that the scope of services and some future contracting opportunities that I'll note in a minute that we're able to meet the needs of the block community as well as the Boosting the Block project. And as council's aware of, Boosting the Block is one of 3 projects that was funded by a $3 million grant from the Melling Foundation. In particular, the Boosting the Block, just as a reminder, it's a project that includes extensive community engagement, and what it will result in is the construction of a physical gateway and cultural corridor between Pack Square and the block, along with the opportunity to enhance some of the public spaces and increase the community capacity of the block collaborative. So it has a couple of prongs within that scope. The contract that we're going to have back in front of you on Tuesday directly supports the Boosting the Block project with the selection of a community facilitator who will then support all aspects of this project to ensure it's successful. And again, just to give some context, this is a 2.5-year project that we're about to undertake. So the community facilitator role will be there for the duration of that. So the other thing that we did is, in addition to the community facilitator contract that we're asking council to approve, we've also worked with the community to identify some additional local contracting opportunities over the course of this 2.5-year project. And we understand from the previous council meeting that was an important element. And so what we've identified is additional contracting opportunities for a community coordinator, a creative strategist, marketing and promotion services. There's a community celebration production scope of work that's available. And of course, we have the design and construction activities that come with the physical improvements. So again, we're back in front of council. We're asking for the approval of a community facilitator contract. We're also gonna, and we'll highlight this in some slides that we'll show, but we're also gonna identify some future contracting opportunities that'll be available for our local community. And so any questions, Councilwoman Roney?
Yeah, one is like a procedural thing. I'm trying to think about how when we're getting information about bids, and I'm just keeping that the disparity study around our business inclusion programming and the front of the mind when we're talking about contracting. I'm going through every consent agenda item, trying to look at how our contracting works to make sure I'm doing my job of getting into the details for that accountability for the outcomes. But it's kind of hard when I don't see a lot of information on the agenda briefing. So it might have helped, like I was able to pull the 11 contracts off of a local media outlet, but it would have helped to have that in our, that information in our materials. So one of the things that I appreciate is that we see all 11 of the folks who applied or the organizations that applied are MWBE. That's really encouraging because it shows that our outreach is really intentional and it's working. I still have the same concerns as before, that we're going to be missing that the local history and the local connection. Though I do appreciate that we're breaking it down into smaller contracts. But I just want to let you know that I still have the same concerns, and my solution would be like it would help to have some more information in our agenda briefing, like all the folks who applied for the contract.
Thank you for those comments. Councilwoman Turner.
Sure, just briefly, I appreciate this follow-up. I know, as a body, we're kind of required to follow through with our very specific RFP process, so it's hard to adjust things after that process has been started. But I wonder, when we talked about this before, we mentioned, do we need to be revising or creating or assisting staff with any additional policy work that would help achieve these outcomes more consistently, specifically around could we add weight for those in our community or those with historical expertise in the area, et cetera. So I guess this is just a moment to say, this is great, it's moving forward. I'm glad there's some smaller contracts, but do we also need to do some policy review on this?
Thank you, Councilwoman Turner. Or go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
Councilmember Turner, when you're saying on this, are you saying specifically this particular item?
Not this bid, no.
In general?
Yeah, not this bid, not this project, but
Right.
just, going forward.
Yeah, I think we've heard you. Heard council. I shouldn't say you. We've heard council in terms of us looking at, as we are crafting RFPs, including a preference for working with local or adding local as a high priority. We still have legal issues that, we don't want to prejudice this process too much, but I'm sure Brad will review everything that we develop and keep us in line with what is possible. But I think I'm hearing a preference for local vendors as we go through the process.
I would I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's a preference for local vendors. I believe it's more accurate to say a higher scoring or a scoring rubric that takes into account local knowledge.
And that's kind of hard for us to measure, but yes, I hear you. But we'll definitely take that into consideration.
Antoinette, does it kind of align with, I'm just thinking about like subject matter experts. When we're talking about reconnecting the block, but we have other issues like around homelessness. Like we're specifically told that the way that we get from the stuck spot that we're in to moving our community forward is to rely on subject matter experts. And I don't see the scoring for the subject matter experts in a situation like this, specifically when we're talking about reconnecting the block.
So I'm not specifically talking about this circumstance. What I am talking about, or what I could envision, is an instance where, I don't know, you're doing something specific interest to the local community. But I could envision someone, I don't know, from Chapel Hill who grew up here bidding, and then someone who happens to be in Asheville right now with less local knowledge. And I wouldn't want anything that would preclude the business from Chapel Hill from attaining the bid. So Brad, you jump in before I say too much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Mosley. This is absolutely one of those, what I'll just describe as a somewhat subjective criteria that we do try to incorporate, and we can certainly place an additional focus on dependent upon the contract. So I think this is an example. Obviously, this one has evolved to the point where obviously we're beyond that sort of scoring metric development, but a contract that is involving itself with engaging in the community is one that I think would lend itself to that kind of a subject matter awareness component in the scoring, perhaps more than someone who is just filling potholes, perhaps. So it I think varies based upon the kind of contract, but this is something that I do think we have within our legal allowance, the ability to add some additional component scoring for things like local awareness, local understanding, subject matter expertise, and even in certain circumstances, a local's preference. I would only caveat that by saying that the term locals is a bit of a floating term as well. As you've mentioned, Antoinette, that can certainly mean someone who perhaps used to be a local, has 20, 30 years, maybe isn't now. But I would also mention that as part of our work on the disparity study, the firm that we utilized determined that locals, the local market, actually varied based upon the kind of contract that we did. And in some cases, they suggested that the local market was actually nationwide, depending upon the type of contract that came in. So I would suggest to council that we hear you as a staff, and we agree that this is a valuable component to this. We would, I think, move forward seeing where we not only have the legal capacity, but the type of contracts that lend themselves to these type of additional scoring components, and begin blending that in as much as possible to capture that element in our selection process.
Thanks, Brad and others. I appreciate y'all weighing in. I think what I'm hearing is we just don't want this to go by the wayside. I don't know if maybe I could suggest that a staff change comes to policy, finance, and governance or something, just so we could get a once over or understand what becomes of this conversation.
Any other questions or comments from council on this item?
Maggie, did
Or
you
Ms.
have a
Campbell?
comment? Yeah, okay.
So I'm gonna move on. Just I want two more things. We'll be before you Tuesday as unfinished business. So staff will have a presentation and we'll kind of review the information. But I do want to note that when I mentioned we have these additional local contracting opportunities, one of the key elements is the idea of a community coordinator position, and the intention of that is to contract with a hyper local firm or person that can really provide that local connectivity that Councilwoman Roney was kind of referring to. So again, we'll have a little more information about that, but I do think we have opportunities. We have some really hyper local contracting opportunities that we've identified. And I think we have a great firm, Illumin, that we believe can help us manage this project to be successful over the next 2.5 years. But again, more to come on Tuesday. So moving on to new business, we've got items on, or actually resolutions that will initiate the planned general obligation bond approval process. There's a number of steps that are required to kind of put that into motion. Tony is here again today, and he's going to provide, Tony and Ms. Campbell are going to provide more information on this item under the other issues and updates later this morning. So that can go ahead, Councilwoman Ullman.
I just want to chime in. As most of you know, I will be missing my first council meeting on Tuesday, so I will not be here, but I want to share loudly that I'm super excited and wish I could vote in support of the bond stuff on Tuesday. Just want to say that out loud.
So thank you, Councilman Ullman. That concludes our agenda for the May 28th meeting. Two more items I'll cover, then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Campbell for other issues and updates. We do not have any council committees to cover today. And then finally, on our 8-week agenda, I really just want to highlight the June 11th meeting. So June 11th is a meeting that we've scheduled at the Harris Cherokee Center Banquet Hall. So we'll be at a different location. It does start at the normal time of 5 p.m. However, that will be a busy day. You'll have a conditional zoning public hearing for residential development in Hall Creek. You'll have your FY25 budget adoption, and you will also have your final reading of the bid ordinance. So again, June 11th is a big meeting. It's at the banquet hall. So more information to come on that in terms of logistics. Any other questions on the 8-week agenda? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Campbell for other issues and updates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Well, we are approaching kind of almost the end of the budget process. We have Jake Dundas, who's going to kind of give us an update on the capital improvement program that we are currently have underway in terms of our budget for this year. And then we're going to follow up and have a deeper dive, mostly Tony, presenting information on the two items that we have on the agenda regarding the GO bonds for 2025 and those important milestones and dates that need to be met in order for us to get this item on a referendum. But before Jay comes up, I do just want to see if Rachel Wood has anything she would want to add in terms of the presentation. This is what we normally do as part of our manager's report. On a quarterly basis, we're trying to provide a kind of a no surprise environment, particularly for these projects, because we have a tremendous amount of need for the projects, but also a need for us to be extremely transparent with the community in terms of the status of these projects. They are entrusting us to deliver these projects in a timely manner. So, Rachel, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add before Jay comes up.
Thank you, Deborah. I think you covered it really well. As Deborah mentioned, this is really part of what we're trying to do now on a quarterly basis to keep council updated, primarily on projects that are either about to go into design or actively under construction. So today's presentation that Jade's going to cover is an attempt to answer several questions that have been raised by council and the public throughout the budget season. Some of those questions pertain to specific projects. Some of those questions pertain to how we present our CIP data on the dashboard as well as on the project pages. And so hopefully as a result of today's dialogue and then the similar presentation being delivered to the public on Tuesday, several of those questions can be answered, and then there can be just some general awareness of the status of some of these very important construction projects that are about to be underway. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jade to start the presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm remote and on my phone today, so I hope everything's coming through. This today's presentation is just a summary and kind of a preview of what we will be talking in more depth about on Tuesday. We did have, as it's been explained, is that typically these are focused heavily on the projects, and my had intended on really focusing on downtown projects. There is a focus on downtown projects in next Tuesday's presentation. But due to some other comments that have recently come up, we wanted to be able to also address the idea of how we're communicating on a routine basis, not just in the quarterly updates, but more of on a day-to-day information availability standpoint. And so this presentation is 3 slides, and that includes this cover slide. So again, there's not a lot of rich information in this. We hope to get to that in a deeper discussion on next Tuesday, but just really wanted to give you an overview of what we're going to be presenting on Tuesday. So Katie, next slide. No presentation would be complete without a key takeaway slide. And so we are really going to focus on explaining how changing circumstances, and that includes at all phases of a project, including bidding, even starting with planning, design, scope changes, can impact the delivery schedules and cause changes in project information. So it's kind of a continuous effort for us to be able to stay up with that information, and really focused on making sure that the information we're providing is not confusing. And so we're working on really concentrating on working on the tools that we use to communicate. Project delivery schedules are variable and dependent on many factors, including review requirements and external funding partners, and the review requirements required by those external funding partners, including federal funding and DOT. Unique circumstances such as location, which includes varied utilities and topography, also present challenges, and so that really presents a challenge in trying to provide scheduling information. We know that we need to. That's a responsibility that we have, but it's definitely, we'll explain that in a little bit more detail on Tuesday. And then we have also, as I've mentioned to council before, we've hired staff recently. We created a position from one of our available staff vacancies to focus on communication. And part of that work will be the upfront work of analyzing the tools that we use and how we are conveying the information about projects. But also spreading out and being more comprehensive in how consistent in how we're doing information delivery to people in areas that are heavily impacted by projects, but then also just citywide as well. We're already seeing the benefits of that in the meetings that we're having about McCormick Field. We've been able to coordinate on those through the help of that new position. So next slide, Katie. So this is, again, kind of a preview. I've probably hit a lot of these topics already, but to be more specific, we are doing a project update. It is going to focus on downtown. There are a few other highlighted projects. We will talk about McCormick Field, another portion of that, which we've tried to come on a quarterly basis and give council an idea of what to expect in the next 3 months. And so that is a portion of that presentation. And then also we're going to share lessons learned, just a brief summary of, 2016 was the first bond that the city of Asheville passed in a long time. We've had a tremendous amount of success through the implementation of that bond. We found some hiccups, and so we really just want to highlight those and provide the information so that as we're going into this next bond presentation, we can be well informed about how we're presenting and what kind of projects we're putting forth. And then again, as I've mentioned in detail, is that we're going to discuss the work task of the new communication specialist. That is specifically a coordinated effort between CAPE and capital projects, but we do know that there's importance to have that individual be available to the organization as a whole. And we're working through that. But this position has only been filled for probably around a month. And so we're really trying to still get our feet under us and work out the roles and responsibilities and try to figure out how to make this position move us forward by leaps and bounds with communication. So like I said, that's the last slide. I didn't even follow up the key takeaway slide because you just had that one the slide before. But really just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on what we're going to talk about on Tuesday and see if there's any questions or anything that we could add to the presentation.
Jade, really quickly, just to follow up, he didn't mention this specifically, but I know there have been a lot of questions around the Patton Avenue sidewalk project, and Jade will be going into detail on that project, as well as several other projects in the Patton Avenue corridor as part of Tuesday's presentation.
That's correct, and I will coordinate with Greg and Public Works to make sure that they can be there to answer questions as well. Councilwoman Rooney?
Yeah, this, I'm not sure if it's on your to-do list. I heard that we were looking a lot at downtown, but in the conversation around the bonds and the conversation around Malvern Hills Pool, some neighbors have been engaging me about the status of like finishing up the Walton Street Pool Park. I spent a good bit of time on Sunday in that neighborhood. And I understand there's some remaining funds left and some last decisions that need to be made. So I went to the Walton Street Park page for the city of Asheville, and I didn't see any updates there. So I wasn't sure if that's something we're expecting on a future presentation or if it should be part of this capital conversation. I thought I heard another hand go up, so.
We could certainly add Walton Street Park for as another project that we cover. Like I said, my intention was to focus on downtown, and that's shifted. And we're definitely want to be flexible, especially in the effort of communicating appropriately and where it's needed. I think that we can get an update on that on Walton Street as well.
That'd be great. And then if there's any place that I should be sending neighbors who have questions about the last decisions and the remaining funds that are available, like I said, I look for the project page first. So if there's a better place to be sending folks who have questions, that'd be good to know.
Yeah, I'll certainly be ready to convey that information.
Okay. Any other questions of Jay? Any additional information you think you may want in terms of an update regarding CIP projects underway? And again, these are kind of the critical path. These are the ones that, as Rachel said, are either in design. We're anticipating this to be coming to council in the next couple of months. So if not, we'll move on to the next item, which is the FY25 budget. We have spent a whole lot of time discussing the operating budget. So we're not going to spend much more time on that. I know that there's still conversations about compensation that are still out there. And we certainly want to avail ourselves for whatever conversation you want to have about the operating budget today, but we thought we needed to focus on the two items in particular that are on the agenda regarding getting prepared for the issue, not the issuance, but the referendum for the general obligation bond. And we hope we can get to issue them next year. But I want to now turn it over to Tony McDowell, who is going to review, in particular, again, those two items that are on your agenda for action. Tony.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Campbell, and good morning, everybody. And like Jade, I'm also remote this morning, so hopefully no technical issues will pop up. And before I get into the GEO bond, just quickly on the public hearing. So it will be the public hearing on the operating budget. We'll have a very brief presentation for you all right before we go into the public hearing and turn it over to you all to take public comment. It'll really be kind of focused on some of those high level highlights that we showed you all a couple weeks ago when we presented the budget. And then we'll just kind of briefly cover some of the other public input opportunities that were available earlier in the process as well. So like I said, it will be a very brief presentation before we hand it to you all to kick it off for the public hearing. So, but happy to answer any questions on that today as well. But like Ms. Campbell said, today we really want to focus on the agenda items that are under new business for you all related to the GEO bond. And the actual agenda items and the actions that you all will be taking on Tuesday are really what I would call technical and legal in nature. It's statutorily required steps that start the process off and allow us to begin to have conversations with the LGC, submit the application for the November 2024 bond. And so we'll be back to you all with further actions in the next couple months. But since this was the first action, and there's also still some discussions going on about the size of the categories and the projects and such, we wanted to take a little bit more time with you all and do a quick presentation on Tuesday for you all in the public to cover that. And we're going to do a slimmed down version of that this morning. So Katie, you can go to the next slide. So key takeaways, as you all know, investment in our capital facilities, which include equipment, infrastructure, facility that's essential to effective service delivery. As you all also know, we've undergone some extensive planning efforts over the last 12 to 18 months that have really provided us with some good information in terms of identifying projects and prioritizing what the needs are. We are in need of additional resources, and I'll show a couple slides that show our current CIP, which we have needs that far exceed our ability to fund those needs within our existing resources. And so what we're going to be doing is asking voters to approve general obligation bonds in November to add some additional capacity and additional resources for the CIP program. And GEO bonds are a very effective tool for doing that. And I have a slide later to kind of highlight what they are and why they are an effective tool. And then, like I mentioned, the action that you all will be taking on Tuesday is really just to initiate the legal process that will allow us to stay on track to do the referendum in November. So next slide. So the things we'll be covering Tuesday, and again, we'll do this at a little bit higher level today. We will give an overview of the process that we've been through over the last 12 to 18 months, some of the key steps there. I do want to touch upon some of the key elements of the GEO bond referendum process, the dates, the actions that you all are going to be taking. And then I think we'll, at the end, we'll finish, and I think this is probably where most of the discussion is around the categories, the amounts of those categories and the projects within those. And we'll have some specific examples to show you all on Tuesday of what those projects might be. So Katie, you can go to the next slide. So again, we're going to just quickly go over the process. We've shrunk this part of the presentation a little bit for you all today because you've seen a lot of this already as we've gone through the budget process. You can go to the next slide, Katie. Again, we'll highlight the challenges and opportunities related to capital, which again, the challenges being we have a lot of needs and we don't have sufficient resources within our current revenues to meet those needs. The opportunities, as I mentioned before, again, we've done a lot of work already, planning work, and there's a list of some of the plans and assessments that we've done over the last 12 to 18 months. And so what that has done is that's given us some really good data to help inform the decisions about projects for this particular GEO bond coming up in November. So you can go to the next slide, Katie. And again, just as a reminder, we do have we have a CIP in place already. It's what we refer to as our regular CIP through the general fund. It's funded primarily with limited obligation bonds, which is a form of debt. We put about $16 million annually from the general fund into that program to pay the debt on projects that we've already completed and also upcoming projects. And as you'll see on the next slide, most of what we have in the CIP for the next 5 years are really maintenance type projects. And we have really a limited capacity to add new or additional projects within the next 5-year time frame, given our limited resources. So next slide, please. So again, this is what our proposed CIP looks like that we brought to you all a couple weeks ago. This is just the general fund. And I guess a couple things I would highlight here. There are a couple of years where you see large expenses in street and sidewalks. Those are primarily specific projects. For example, in FY25, that includes the Cox Avenue project, which is funded with other resources other than just city dollars. And then in FY27, that includes the I-26 allocation that you all have approved, as well as a couple of other larger sidewalk projects as well. But kind of taking those out of the mix, what this really shows is that over the next 5 years, we'll be spending somewhere between $15 to $20 million a year. But a lot of that is really targeted just for maintenance of existing equipment, existing facilities. You'll see a large part of that is just our fleet and equipment. And then also under the streets and sidewalks, it's our annual resurfacing program that's a part of those dollars. So not a lot of dollars to meet existing needs for our CIP. So you can go to the next slide. And so here are some of those existing needs that we are not able to fund through the regular CIP. Like I said, we did a pretty extensive process this year that we really started back in September with the budget office working with departments to identify their capital needs. This is a summary of those, and I haven't added these dollars up, but they add up to a lot more than what we're able to fund. And so again, that's why we're looking forward to the GEO bond process to help begin to address some of these additional needs.
And Tony,
next slide, please.
I would just add that these are estimated numbers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and Jade pointed out, I think in his presentation,
and I would just add that Thomas Wolf is sort of lopsiding Parks and Rec, but
for sure. And I think on facilities, the three that are listed there, obviously big dollar projects as well, and so those make up a lot of that $258 million in that category as well. So, okay, next slide. And so then we're going to talk to you all again a little bit about the GEO bond process itself. And Katie can go on to the next one. So what are GEO bonds? So they're a long-term borrowing tool. Typically, the debt stretches out over 20 years. Local governments pledge what's called the full faith and credit of the municipality, which that essentially means taxing power. So it requires voter approval if you're going to do that. The good news is that these type of bonds generally come with the lowest interest rates, and that's because folks out in the bond markets who are interested in purchasing our bonds, when they see it's backed by that full faith and credit, i.e. Property taxes, the risk level, the considered risk level goes down for that, so therefore we get a lower interest rate. North Carolina law requires that when we do a GEO bond referendum that we divide the referendum up into categories. So instead of having one large vote for $75 million, and you all know this, you'll see the categories that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. The vote has to be broken down into those categories, and voters have to approve each one of those categories individually. So it's not one vote for the $75 million, it's separate votes for each of the categories. And then finally, this is something that was added in the last few years. Bond votes can only be held in regular elections when polls are open across the jurisdiction. So this limits us. So November of this year is an opportunity would be another opportunity in 2 years when there is a election in 2026, and then another one in 4 years. And jurisdictions used to call special elections and do bond votes like that, but the legislature doesn't allow that anymore. So next slide. So again, GEO bonds, and I think we've shown you all this slide before, they can be used for a variety of things. This is a list of some of the uses that are allowed under GEO bonds. I won't go through all of these. Katie, you can go on to the next slide. As a reminder, we did a GEO bond referendum, as you all know, back in 2016. It was our first one that was successful in a very long time. It was $74 million, 17 million for parks, 32 for transportation, and 25 for housing. So next slide. So one other thing I want to point out too, and this is a change since the 2016 election. As of January 1 of this year, the legislature has put in place some new requirements related to disclosure on the ballot. So when voters go out and vote in November, and some of the later actions that we're going to have you all taking this summer, you will see this in the ballot language. We have to disclose the estimated full cost of what it's going to take to pay these bonds back over the 20-year time frame, and what the potential property tax increase would be to fund that repayment. Per our bond counsel, he is recommending that staff utilize some LGC approved interest rates for these calculations. The LGC went in and looked at what the average interest rates have been over the last 20 years on some GEO bond issuances. And these are the recommended rates that they're suggesting local governments use. And it's what our bond counsel is recommending that we use as well. So like I said, there'll be a calculation coming in the next few months that will show the impact of that. Now, what's going to happen here is most likely that calculation is going to lead to the potential property tax rate increase that's shown on the ballot being higher than the actual increase that we will have to implement as a part of next year's budget process. So there's going to definitely have to be some communication with residents around that. We've done some estimates, I think as you all know, of what the impact is going to be next year. And I think on the next slide, Katie, you can move to that. Just want to kind of highlight that for you all. So as you all know, there's going to be a revaluation coming up that's going to change property values across the city. So as a part of one of the memos that we provided you all, we made some assumptions about what that increase might be. So we're assuming after revaluation that the average residential property value would be around $420,000, and that it would take roughly a 2.4 cent tax rate increase to pay for the debt on the bonds. And when you do the math on that, that comes out to an increase of a little over $100 a year for the average taxpayer. Again, these are estimates at this point. A lot of these numbers on this page are going to change by the time council takes action next year. And again, the number on this page is definitely going to be different than the number that voters see on the ballot when they go to vote in November, utilizing those assumptions that the LGC is asking us to include. Next slide. So upcoming actions and kind of timelines for all this. So as you all know, you will take action next Tuesday, hopefully, to approve us applying to the LGC for the November bonds. We'll be back in June to actually introduce what's called the bond orders, and you'll set a public hearing on July 23rd. You'll hold that public hearing so folks from the community can come and comment. You will also adopt the bond order and set the referenda. So that's kind of the final step that puts everything in place. We then communicate to the Board of Elections that the referendum is going to be happening. It'll happen on November 5th, and then we'll come back to you all, assuming it passes, of course. We'll come back to you all in December to certify the results. The LGC has added an extra step now in January or February where they have to approve as well. And at that time, once the LGC has approved, we would come back to you all and do a budget amendment for the projects. And so if we did have projects that were shovel ready and able to get started, they would be starting sometime in the springtime of 2025. And then that final piece, as I was talking about with the property tax rates. Ultimately, you all will be setting the property tax rate associated with the bonds in June of 2025 as a part of the budget process. And we'll be having a lot of discussions with you all during the process about what those rates may be. We'll have more information about the reval, and we'll be able to give you all some much more concrete numbers next spring about what the property tax rate increase might look like. So next slide. Okay, and I guess I'll pause here before I get into the category recommendations, just to see if anybody has any questions, or Ms. Campbell, if there's anything you wanted to add before I kind of segue into this last part.
No, I think these, we unfortunately, this is a legal process, and so we have to go over all these procedural matters. But I think what most of council as well as the community are interested in are how's the money going to be spent. And so I think we want to transition into some ideas. This is not a completed list. We are trying to learn from the 2016 bonds in terms of being able to be a little bit more flexible on the projects, being a little bit more nimble in terms of commitments to things, because we truly have to worry about transparency and accountability, and we just want to be a bit more cautious in terms of our commitment and what we say we are going to do, we need to do. So Tony, I'll turn it back over to you and see if there are any questions from council.
All right, Katie, you can go to the next slide. All right, so as you all know, and we've shared this, I think, at a couple of your previous meetings, we're recommending the $75 million bond package broken down into 4 categories this time: $25 million for affordable housing, 20 for transportation, 15 for parks, recs, and entertainment, and 15 for public safety, for a total of $75 million. So next few slides, we're going to show you all a little bit more detail on some of these. And again, these projects that we're going to show are examples of projects that we think we can undertake as a part of this bond. So you can go to the next slide, Katie. I'll start with the housing one. And again, just to highlight a couple things here, not really any specific items here other than the fact that as a part of the previous bond, we did utilize a significant amount of that money via the Housing Trust Fund. We anticipate doing that again as a part of this particular GEO bond. As you all know, the affordable housing plan is being wrapped up, and so there's going to be some specific strategies that come out of that plan that we hope to be able to utilize some of the bond money for. We actually had a meeting earlier this week with our bond counsel and Brad Branham to kind of talk through what of those strategies might be eligible for bond funding. So we're having some really good conversations with that. And then, as you all may remember from 2016, one of the bond eligible uses is redevelopment of city-owned land for affordable housing as well. So again, kind of an idea of what some of the expenses and some of the projects might be with the housing money for November. Councilmember Roney?
Yeah, is this the fullness of where we're going to see the housing examples, or is it going to stay at this vague level? Because I know we've talked about the lot next to the transit center and the last bond funds kind of being used to purchase the land, but will we expect to get into some of those details later in the presentation, or are we asking questions throughout?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
No, I think you can certainly ask questions. We are building this bond referendum as we speak in terms of some of the projects, and if there are items that you all are interested in, we certainly will investigate. But in terms of a level of specificity in terms of which projects on the Housing Trust Fund, we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
And Rachel, if I've misspoke, please add.
No, you didn't misspeak, Deborah, at all. I'll just add that with specifics on the Art Place project, I believe Jessica Morris is planning to make a presentation to the Planning and Economic Development Committee at either the June or July meeting, just to provide general updates on where we are with that project and what our plans are, which would then tie into future funding discussions.
Great. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
That's full.
All right, I'll move on to the next slide. So, and I think for the next couple slides or next couple examples, we're going to have a kind of a slide that shows general usage, and then another slide that's going to show some specific projects that we're targeting. So transportation at $20 million. I think you all probably remember some of the types of projects that we spent money on last time from the 2016 bond. It included street resurfacing, new sidewalks, sidewalk improvements. We did a number of things with what we call transportation safety projects, projects around transit improvements, ADA improvements. I think we had Greenway, a couple of Greenway projects, Greenway/multi-use path projects that were funded in 2016. And then as we look ahead to 2024, we definitely want to target projects that are prioritized in the GAP plan. So next slide. So I think we do have some more specific examples here of projects that have been identified, and we've been working with Jade and his team and city manager's office to work on this list. And so here we have, again, a list of some of the potential sidewalk projects, kind of where they're located in the city. We've identified the Airport Road and the Patton Avenue sidewalk projects, and the Reed Creek Greenway slash multi-use path as another example of a project under transportation. And again, more to come on this list as well. Councilmember Roney?
So trying to weave and zoom out a little bit to the I-26 connector, I hear that the Burton Street Smith Mill Creek Greenway could be part of that project. It could come back at the city. Do we have an idea of where projects like that bubble up? It seems like by being in a gray area, it almost seems like it could be hard to get at the top of a list or in a list at all. And I just wanted to make sure it didn't fall through the cracks. Is this something we could expect in that TBD list in the future, or is it sliding somewhere else?
Just jumping in here. I mean, I think we don't abandon all of our master plans in terms of greenways, sidewalks, bike ped, all the GAP plan, all those plans, if I understand, are controlling. Staff is determining what the best resources are for it. So they'll put a project in the bond, but then things happen, like we get federal funding or we get state funding, or the TDA will grant an award that will cover a greenway project or whatever. So we need to, in my mind, it's not so much we identify funding for the project, we identify the priority of the project, and then the funding, the funding piece is then the best funding available is then identified. It is how I understand it. And sometimes we don't know yet, like Airport Road, I bet that's going to qualify for some kind of DOT match. We can pretty much count on that, but how that all comes together is a little bit of an unknown. Kim, say again what the project was that you were talking about.
Yeah, just when this is the example of when things do bubble up to the top as an example, it gives a impression of priority. And I guess my concern is when we have those overlapping plans and priorities. For some reason, the Reed Creek is the one for here, but it doesn't really tell me how it jumped into this position of visibility. And so because of that, I wanted to maybe better understand the process, because Smith Mill Creek Greenway has been a long time neighborhood priority, but I didn't want it to fall in a gray area of being on, because it's not on any priority list, it then doesn't happen. It just seemed like there were pointing fingers in multiple directions, from the DOT 26 level to back at us to back at DOT. And then somehow Reed Creek is here. So when we get into this detail specificity, it helps me to know why.
Yeah. So that sounds more like a transportation priority issue in terms of figuring out where that project is and whether it's on a list and whether it has any prioritization.
And
I-
we'll certainly get that information to you all. And you know, part of our challenge, and Mayor, you kind of hit on it, and Jada hit on it when he did his presentation, is yes, things change, but also we are trying to not just leverage resources, we are trying to leverage, minimize an impact on the community in terms of all of our construction projects. So we are looking holistically and comprehensively at what is the timing, what should be the timing of our projects, so that again, we're not going and putting a sidewalk in and then tearing it up to do a water project. So this is again the holistic way that we're looking at this and trying to time all of these projects in a manner, again, that has the least impact, but we are trying to also stay true to promises and commitments and things that we have said to the community, that these are priorities for us and for them. So it's a lot of juggling. But again, these are examples. They are not at all an exhaustive list. And that will unfold over the next several months.
Yeah, and I would just add, Ms. Campbell mentioned leveraging, and you all probably know with the $74 million bond issuance that passed back in 2016, we did leverage that into more. And I can't remember the exact dollar amount of all those projects now, but we've gotten NCDOT money, we've gotten additional grants as well. And so I think the total budget for all of those projects, including other resources other than the bond, is somewhere close to $100 million. And so I would anticipate with this bond as well, there'll be that leveraging happening as well. And so we'll end up getting more projects done than just the 75 million. And I think as part of that, and again, this is the lessons learned from Jade's presentation, is maintaining that flexibility at this point in terms of identifying projects, so that as things change over the next few years, we can shift money around to take advantage of those leveraging opportunities. Councilmember Ullman.
I would love for us to, if we could scratch up what that leverage number is at some point. I don't expect you to have every number in your head, Tony, although I've quizzed you before and you have more than I can imagine. But I think that would be really helpful as we're communicating the story to the public of like this, how successful we've been with leveraging in the past. I think that would be, I'd love to see that number if we could pull that for a future time.
Definitely, for sure. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, Katie. So again, Parks and Recreation, $15 million. I think we showed you all this slide at your last council meeting. So here's the types of projects that would be covered under Parks and Recreation. Some improvements to existing facilities, including community centers, outdoor sport courts, playgrounds, land acquisition, investments in aquatic facilities. And then again, as you all know, much like with the affordable housing plan, we have the Recreate Asheville plan, which is wrapping up, scheduled to be finalized by the early summer, and that will also provide some key information about projects moving forward as well. So I think on the next slide, we do have some more specific examples of projects under Parks and Rec. So Katie, you can move on to that one. So again, we have four examples here, pretty geographically dispersed throughout the city. There are examples of things that are under consideration: the Malvern Hills Pool, the Shiloh Community Center, recreation and Azalea Park improvements, and also further improvements to the Jake Rusher Park in South Asheville. Next slide. Okay, and then I think this is our last category, the public safety facilities. This is new, the new category that we would have this time. And it includes maintenance and upgrades to existing facilities, and also acquiring land for future new facilities or upgrade facilities for police and fire. As you all know, we had we've shared a lot of information about the comprehensive facility study. And so what we'll do is utilize information from that study to guide us in terms of which investments we make in these facilities as a part of the bond. We do have some specific examples of projects here that we're considering, and Katie, you can go on to that slide. It's a list of police and fire upgrades. There's a Haywood Road Police Substation renovation that's in West Asheville. Potentially looking at land acquisition for relocating Fire Station 7 in North Asheville. Some upgrades to the fire and police facilities in Oakley. As you all know, we've been already doing some upgrades and repairs to the municipal building downtown. We would look to continue those under the bond. And then also put some money toward planning and design for a future Fire Station 14, which would be located in South Asheville. Councilmember Ullman.
Two thoughts. One, specifically for public safety, and one just at large across the bond. When we saw a bunch of the capital planning information throughout the course of the year, I will say that I was surprised to see 15 million for the public safety. It felt like we could do a whole 100 on public safety. So it'd be helpful we could do a whole 100 in any category. I understand this, but why staff is starting with these recommendations with tiers of more here, less here would be helpful to understand, because I do think this is just surprising given how much documented price tags we've seen relatively recently. The second is that in several of these categories, I see land acquisition, and I'm really thankful that we're looking forward, because I think we haven't been aggressive enough with land acquisition for our organization. And I would love this bond, especially as we're getting out the gate with a recurring bond cycle, to produce things that our community can touch and walk in, and to see land acquisition in many categories. I wonder if there's a way that I understand the need, and is there a way that we could focus bond on tangible stuff with hammers and nails that the community can touch and jump on the swings, and then have a heavier priority for land acquisition in our annual capital budget? That's just our regular planning. I just feel like bonds are such an important time for us to connect with the community, and land acquisition is an unseen value. And so I just want to put that thought out there that I'd really love to see heavy priority on things that the community can touch. And bonds, I don't know.
Just on that one, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but on land acquisition, Fire Station 7, is that so that you can redo Fire Station 7? Anybody? Yeah. Tony, isn't that because we own, that's one of those weird old joint buildings where we only have part of it. So maybe it just needs some wording difference there, Maggie, that it's a remodel of Station 7, but they've got to acquire additional property that it abuts. It's one of those old ones where it was the library, the old library, and a rec center and a fire station. And so I assume what they're trying to do is just assemble the completion of that site so they can remodel that building.
Well, then would this include the remodel? So really it's redoing Fire Station 7, and step 1 is land, like that.
It'll be in my, yeah. I appreciate that input. I can't tell you how many times I sit and talk with staff about how we word things so it does seem more relevant to people in terms of what they're voting for. Land acquisition sounds pretty.
Because the bottom line is, whether it's the wording or not, right, I want something to.
But what's the project?
I want proof. Yeah, I want people to be able to touch this and see the value. And there's so much work we do in our budget that isn't necessarily tangible, but is important public spending. But the bond in particular, because it's a ballot, I just think there's a real value for us coming out extremely successfully, especially when we come back in 4 years asking for more. And I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, you promised us this in the bond and we haven't seen it. And so and you've heard my bit.
Well, exactly. I think Mayor and Maggie, you touched on something in terms of when if we put Fire Station 7 on this, and I know we've got to work on wording, is the community going to expect Fire Station 7 with this bond referendum, or can we truly only afford to buy land? So, I mean, and we'll work on this, and we'll have other folks help us understand essentially, because we may have to phase this. That's what I think this is trying to get at, that this ultimately we do want a fire station. Definitely a remodel, renew, whatever. But our first phase in terms of what we can actually afford to do with this bond money may be only to acquire the land. But we hear you, and we need to definitely work on how we frame and phrase these projects so that we are, number one, being very transparent, that we're being held accountable for what we can actually deliver. And then thirdly, held accountable for what we can actually afford.
That does bring up another question. There is kind of like a implied strategy in what you're showing us is like increments in a lot of places as opposed to, I mean, one station. So can you just talk to me about, I mean, I can assume that some of it is to progress stuff in a geographically diverse set of places in our community so we don't have to pick neighborhoods. That could be a good reason to have incremental progress in a lot of places. But can you talk to me a little bit about the strategy? Because I do think that's implied in both this one and the Parks Bond is a little bit in a lot of places as opposed to knock one thing out.
Yeah, I think there is some strategy in terms of being geographically dispersed, but there's also, unfortunately, the need is so geographically dispersed as well. And the longer we put off or delay some of these improvements, obviously the more expensive they're going to be. And again, the need just will grow. So we will have an opportunity, I believe, again, as we continue to have our conversations, we will have more of our technical staff here so that we can explain all the details of each one of these specific projects and why they are prioritized in the manner that they're being prioritized in. But I definitely know that a lot of these projects will have to be phased just because of the cost. And again, you were asking earlier about these, why are these buckets with these kind of allocations like 15 million for public safety, is because fire stations are expensive. And again, we've got to phase it. And unfortunately, we just have a lot of deferred maintenance. And to be honest with the full council and with the community, my direction to staff is to focus on what we have before we can really move into a lot of new things, because we have got to give, for example, our folks opportunities to live in decent, I mean, they almost live in decent firehouses. So that's where we are. I'm into, let's upgrade and upfit what we have, and then we can think about new.
That's very helpful.
Sure. Ms. Roney.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding this part. It seemed to me like a potential different way of looking at this, though I do see some geographic equity here in the different zip codes, is making sure that we can deliver. And so if it looks like we need to hear, like we have very specific needs for Fire Station 7 and Fire Station 9, we're going to get the first one done in the first round of bonds, because if we don't, it will be hard for people to understand that there's phasing, and they might not support a future bond if we don't deliver something tangible. So do we actually need to look at our general capital improvement projects funds and do that kind of cascading in advance so that we pull the more tangible things into the bond so that the community will support it. I just want to make sure, Maggie, that I'm hearing you correctly on that. If we scatter too far, our long-term plan of the rotating bonds may be harder to message.
That's exactly the strategy I'm offering for us to just think about. And I hear, Deborah, you just sharing some of your thinking. And I think this is the first conversation where we're really getting into seeing the first round of how you're considering this. So yeah, Kim, I appreciate you re-articulating that. I do think there's just a lot to think through of all the puzzle pieces, and building on what we talked about with the transportation one of where could we get DOT leverage versus where we can't, or like, you know, Thomas Wolfe isn't even on these lists because we think there might be different ways for that. So like it's not as simple as a home budget. I understand that, but I do think that we want to really come out strong, and we want citizens to be able to look at stuff and go, yes, my money went to that.
Yeah, it seems to me like because we're a little scattered here, we're trying to like build multiple Lego sets at the same time. And we're saying we're going to take this, the land acquisition is like, we're just going to buy the base of the Legos. Whereas, you know, maybe the Oakley Civic Complex, we're talking about maybe starting to build some walls. And because we're not going all in on 1 or 2 Lego sets, the community at the end of this bond project might be like, why do we have so many scattered unfinished Lego sets instead of some that are finished?
It's turn.
Yeah, this is I'm just going to layer this in. I was going to wait to the end of the presentation to share this, but I think what we're all kind of getting to is, well, another situation I want to propose. So, you know, we spoke at the last council meeting about Malvern Hills. I saw it on the list. I really appreciate that. I had also mentioned going to 78 million as an option, and I know we discussed others not supporting that, but I'm curious, kind of like when we did the CIP process, if we could get maybe the actual full department asked, like did Parks and Rec only ask for 15? Did they ask for 19? Did they ask for 50? Did the police substations really amount to 50? That would help me understand the bigger picture, because frankly, I'm wondering if we need to go to 100 million. And I'd love to request that impact again instead of 2.4 cents, because right now what we just saw was $8.33 a month in new expenses for the taxpayer to cover these bonds. But if 100 million is only $10 a month, I would like to know that, because everything we're all hearing is this is piecemeal. We're buying the land, but we're not affecting the building. Well, we could give another 5 or 6 million to each of these categories. And I don't want to bring it up on Tuesday because it's so last minute. So I'm asking you all as counselors to think about this. And if you could get us a list of what the department's full asks were, so we could get a better, broader picture of whether or not we're making a dent or just scratching the surface. And if you could get back to us with the impact of $100 million, that would be helpful.
And I think one of the things that I would need follow-up for that is capacity, because I remember it was going to be a capacity stretch to get from 50 million to 75. So if we're going to double it to 100, can we deliver on time?
It's a great question, Kim, and I agree. And I wonder, at some point you are so committed that what you're doing is just adding hard costs. So let's say if we're doing the fire station in one area and we have hired the project managers, we have administrated the bonding, the funding, all of it, done the leg of paperwork, then maybe they're just getting an additional roof, or maybe they're getting the separation walls for their turnout, whatever it is, but it's a hard cost. And I wonder if there's some of that mixed in, but yeah, I think it's a good point, capacity. So I think that would be an additional layer if we could find out more, but it may not be as bad as we think.
And I bet capacity changes depending on what we're talking about, what kinds of projects we're talking about. I would be interested too. I know public safety is concerned that 15 million is not even going to begin to make a dent. So I would be interested too in looking at the $100 million option. If we think we have the capacity to really move the needle on some of these projects that need to be knocked out in public safety, that would be important to me, in addition to making sure we're doing what we need to do on for Parks and Rec. I know the new Oakley playground, I think we just saw a number was around $700,000. I just saw they're going to do the playground at Carrier Park. These are great. These are fantastic projects, and the community loves them. Obviously, they're not cheap. They are not cheap.
Well, and Esther, if I may, last meeting there was some talk about, since we some didn't want to go above 75. The idea was, could we reduce another bucket? And the sample I heard was housing, and the reasoning be that it was hard for us to spend all 25 million. But I wanted to kind of push back on that thinking, because it was a kind of a slow start, but a fast finish of spending. And I wonder, I think at PED or HCD many months ago, there was a report, a summary of how those housing bonds penciled out, like the final unit counts and what they targeted and what we achieved. If we could have staff send that to us,
that would be good to see. Yeah, that would be good to see, because it's a two-part issue for me. One, can we get the funds spent in time? And the other issue is, just this fundamental issue around local governments using tax dollars to pay for the construction of affordable housing units rather than administering, say, an affordable housing loan fund, which we do to help developers build affordable housing, or partnering on these other projects. I just asked this as sort of more of an existential question about the role of local government, because we're seeing the per unit cost of these projects relative to our overall budget size is enormous. And so while of course we need to address affordable housing in our community, I just asked the question of whether it is the best approach to use $25 million in taxpayer money to leverage units. So it's very important to me, Sage, to look at that presentation and see where we are. I mean, again, I can't say it enough. The county's project at Ferry Road is $90,000 per affordable unit, not including the land acquisition costs. That, we could not handle something of that scale in our budget. And we have to rethink the role of a city in trying to bring online affordable housing units in that manner.
Agree, Esther. We had PED this week, and we learned for a down payment assistance program to effectively hit the target areas and families we're trying to reach, it could be as much as $86,000, I think it was. So yeah, it's just escalating. I assume it will continue to escalate.
I'll jump in with the discussion that we had at the last council meeting of if we're moving dollars around, so there was some sentiment of support for Malvern Hills, which I do, and then does that mean we reduce elsewhere? And I don't love the idea of reducing housing, especially where we're about to have our affordable housing plan, and we still have a bunch of the recommendations from the missing middle, where housing is around what are the 3 Ps they talk about: production, protection, and preservation. And so I have a lot of curiosity about home repair programs. Could that be bond funded? I'm curious I'm at the edge of my seat waiting and excited to see if there are new program areas that we could use bond money for. And maybe y'all have crunched those numbers, but I just want to share that I don't love the idea of reducing the affordable housing section. And I guess I am kind of curious to revisit increasing the bond from 75. And I'd like us to continue talking about this fundamental strategy of scattering a little bit in a lot of places incrementally, or making bigger bets that we can start and finish. I still feel a little torn on that. This definitely, I want us to get stuff done. I want us to bring some things to completion, and that might be across the whole bond package. I could see that, where it's here are the 4 that we're going to really target, and here's the incremental plays. But I think some of that context is important for the long-term strategy.
And the only thing that I would add is, I know you all are extremely concerned about a tremendous amount of need in our community. But if you think about this, the last bond package was in 2016. We haven't finished all of those projects. We've got several more that need to get accomplished. We're into a pretty good groove now. I want you all to look at this as a marathon and not a sprint. We're just not going to achieve and get that 800 and something million list of projects done in 4 years or possibly even 8 years. We hear you all in terms of wanting to possibly increase to 100 million. We discussed what our challenges would be in terms of staff capacity. I mean, we had 74, I believe, in the last bond referendum. We've learned, we've sharpened our tools, and we're doing better in terms of project delivery. And we know that we can deliver 75. We will definitely provide you all with some feedback in terms of the 100, as well as the impact on the taxpayer, because all of this stuff has to be paid for. And with that increase, obviously, the amount of taxes increases as well. Ms. Turner.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. That would be great. I also wonder, I mean, if it's a capacity issue, if you could also layer in just, we would need to hire 3 more people or whatever that is to really pull it off, because we might still want to do that. But if you could help not only quantify capacity gaps, but, you know, maybe give us some real-time info on what it would take to really do it at 100 million.
Sure. Tony?
Okay, thanks, y'all. And Katie, you can go on the next slide. I think we're pretty much at the end. Just a quick reminder of next steps. After next Tuesday, we'll be back in about a month, as I mentioned, on June 25th for the public to set the public hearing and introduce the bond orders. Then you all would have the public hearing in July, adopt the bond orders, and then again, we would be all set for the November vote. And then what would happen after July is much like what happened last time in terms of communication. City manager's office, CAPE, finance and management services staff, along with outside organizations, will coordinate information sharing with the community as we move toward that November vote. So I think the next slide is just back to the key takeaways. I won't run through those again in the interest of time. Happy to answer any more questions y'all might have, and look forward to talking to y'all on Tuesday about this.
And I'm assuming, Tony, that the actual vote would have to have an amount. So we would need to do the analysis of the 100 million and have that available for council to discuss. And hopefully we can get that prior to Tuesday's meeting for sure.
Yeah, great point, Ms. Campbell. So, and I'll ask Brad to weigh in if I misstate this, but what we've heard from our bond counsel is that if we start high and want to go lower, we can do that. But if we start low and want to go higher, so for example, if we approve the $75 million bond orders on Tuesday and then decide that at a later meeting we want to do 100, that has the potential to start the whole process over again and perhaps delay it in such a way that we couldn't make the November ballot. So if we think we want to go higher, the advice from the bond counsel, and Brad, again, I'd ask you to weigh in if I'm saying something incorrect here, is that we would approve this initial vote at a higher level at your meeting on Tuesday, and then we could back down from there.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tony. Council should think about this as the initial request for a ceiling from the local government commission. We can then move down from that, but you're not able to move up unless we restart this process all over with the initial steps that you're going to be contemplating at your Tuesday meeting. So at this point, we would need a number. That number is something you can later reduce, but you cannot move up from without restarting.
Now, Brad, I want to ask you a question. Now, since it's already been put out in the media of sort of what we're actually going for, both on, and then if we go now and increase it, do you think that that will bring so much media attention that people will actually look at we're increasing their taxes even more? I mean, because you got to understand, the media already has out the 75,000. You know, I mean, that's already in the minds of people. So I really think if you did do that, you're gonna get more outcry and bring more, to, it's like, okay, they're doing this, they're doing that. Now they want more money. You see, so I'm sort of concerned about the impact on the community once they hear that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think that's a fair point of discussion, perhaps to give consideration
Not
amongst
really
the other council
illegal.
members.
It's not a legal issue.
Yeah.
That's more of a discussion, I think, Sandra, for the council to have in terms of the messaging. If we've already talked about 75 million for so long that people will get confused. I mean, from a legal standpoint, we are still doing everything correctly.
No, I know.
I hear what you're saying in terms of confusion.
Confusion. I'm just talking about how the public will react to it. That's the only thing I'm.
Sandra, that's why I brought it up today at the agenda briefing. And when we first had our first presentation, it actually mentioned 100 million, and we have taken the road of 75 when we started talking about capacity and just our history of doing 75. But I don't think it's a totally new number, and I don't think you're totally wrong that some people will be like, wait, I thought it was 75 and now it's more. But maybe that difference a month, maybe it's $2 a month or something, maybe that will help with the story.
Yeah, and I think at the time we also said in terms of our actual total capacity is 150 million.
Right.
And we said we definitely couldn't do 150. So we were dividing them up into two different issuance, and staff recommended 75. And, but we did have scenarios of 100 and 150. And so we can bring that information back to you all on Tuesday. Actually, we'll try to get it out to you earlier so that you're able to, again, peruse and digest, because we are expecting an action on Tuesday. At least on the GO bond piece, not the full budget. Public hearing on the operating budget is Monday. Tuesday. Antoinette?
I'll just go ahead and like to take the opportunity to say, Vice Mayor, I agree with your concerns and your assessment. I too have significant concerns about the capacity that we have to go over the $75 million mark. And I'll reiterate something that I said in the last council meeting. What may seem like just a little bit extra per month could end up being really felt deeply by certain members of our community. So thank you for bringing that up, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Spirited conversation. We appreciate all the feedback and input. Looks like the staff got a little bit of homework. We'll go back and make some revisions, particularly in the GO bond capital side of the budget. Are there any other things lingering? Issues, ideas?
Deborah, if I could.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of discussion around salaries for staff and increases for staff. We have the 4.11% that's proposed right now. I know public safety is sort of leading the charge in wanting to see something more than what's being proposed. I did, and I met with the chief this morning and the folks with the police department. I've also, as you all have, met with fire, and so one issue that I'm interested in looking at, I do, and I don't know how many others want to look at this. I do want us to explore two issues. One is, I know there's a great resistance, as always, to raising property taxes. I don't feel real comfortable yet with the approach we're taking in this budget this year, where we're not raising property taxes at all. We're using fund balance, and we're setting ourselves up for an inevitable property tax next year that'll be significant. So I know many local governments in North Carolina, unfortunately, this year are having to raise property taxes. The county is going to go ahead and do 2.5%. I really do want us to think about whether we should stagger this. We know we're going to be raising property taxes next year. So I'd like to see us do part of that this year. And I would also like to see us do something more significant for employees if we can. I know people have sent us all kinds of suggestions about flat rate per hour and dividing higher earners and lower earners and doing all these things. I asked Deborah if they could just tell me what it would look like to raise staff salaries by 6% for everybody, and also to not use fund balance for recurring expenses and keep it at 15% of our, keeping fund balance at 15%. So I know we've got excess fund balance. We can definitely use that for one-time expenses. But what would it look like if we kept it at that 15% threshold and did something more for employees? What kind of property tax would we be looking at to make that possible? I don't know the answer yet, but that's just something that I'm looking at. What that would do, just so you know, for example, in public safety, for police officers who complete BLET, their starting salary would be $50,300 and change. So it would do some important things for the police department. And I know there's some discussion around, well, can't you just do it for public safety and don't do it for everybody else? And there's a lot of schools of thought around that. I don't feel comfortable with that either. I really would like to see us take care of public works and parks and rec and all the other staff that we have that are also struggling to afford to live here. I understand that's a balancing act with taxpayers, but we have, as you know, very few options, actually none, and that we can only look at property tax revenue. So I just wanted to put that out there. I know we're all still kind of trying to figure out where to land on this. And so that's one idea I had, and was able to talk to Deborah a little bit about it this morning before this meeting, but I know there's still some homework assigned there. Folks raise their hand.
Thank you, Esther. I really appreciate you bringing this up because much like I was saying about the bonds, like sometimes we're just so far behind that we have to take a bigger step forward. And I wonder, I would actually like to request the breakout data if we only did first responders, APD and AFD, and maybe that's community responders. I think they fall under one of those, just so I have that information. I'm not saying that's the avenue I would go, but I would like to have that information if those categories went 6 and the rest stayed at 4.11. And I just want to echo, it's nuts to me that these first responders are not making $50,000 yet. And I think, whether it's an economical issue across the nation or in Asheville, the onus is on us to fix it. It doesn't seem like enough. I was just counseling with a friend on a resume building opportunity she had for an office manager at $60,000 with full benefits. And I thought, my goodness, one certainly entails a lot more risk. And we might need to take a bigger step to address that gap. And I just want to make sure that we're not just talking about APD, but also AFD, because they've been bringing this up as some of their lowest workers not even, in their opinions, making a full living wage or working, I don't want to bring up the hours commentary right now, but that they could also use a boost at that lowest tier.
Kim.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that the community-led solution that provided by Vicki from Just Economics, if folks haven't looked all the way to the bottom of that yet, we're talking about 9 police officers that make slightly less than $50,000 with the $2,400 raise. If we increase it by $162 a year, gets them above $50,000. So even this community-driven solution, and make sure that everyone has a raise. We're talking about meeting the firefighters' request, getting our police officers above 50,000. We're talking about parks and rec staff, sanitation staff, and giving everybody a raise by more effectively using our resources. But there's not only just one path to getting there. In hearing my colleagues' request about what would we be willing to cut, I don't want to pit our long-term plans for things like housing against ongoing operational costs, but it would help me understand how many studies do we have planned for this year, or what other one-time costs could be moved, because we haven't been presented that solution. If studies are in the range of $300,000 or $400,000, it would help me know not just one, but a few things that are on the table.
I mean, I think the primary one's a transit study. Are you saying you don't want to support advancing our transit plan this year?
Well, we don't have a list of the full studies that are available. If we are not talking about partnering with the county on doing the kinds of service expansion for study, and we have an option to delay transit studying until next year when we have more resources and have the county at the table, then what I'm hearing from advocacy groups is, though it would make me uncomfortable to delay a study, it may be the most fiscally responsible, but also better for our partnership strategy.
I want to go back to what I was saying, but I want to make sure, Kim, you're done, or no one needs to respond to that part. Okay.
No, done.
I guess what would help me, Deborah, is we mentioned this in the last council meeting that we know we're going to have a tax increase next year just to meet salary needs. Do we have any idea what that number looks like? Like, is it going to be 10 million next year, and therefore we should take off half of that bite now? Like, I'm just having a hard time seeing the broader picture. If you could supply us with any kind of information you know about that, that would help.
Sure.
Kim,
We provided a little bit of that in an earlier email that we sent.
Okay.
I sent a memo, budget memo.
Thank you. Appreciate
Okay,
that.
that was the really long one, several pages. I'll look back at
Sorry
it.
about that.
Okay, no, that's all right. I have it open on my desktop. I can look it up. real
Okay,
quick.
great.
And then Kim, to your point, I mean, and Just Economics suggestion of how we look at it, I think I'm actually open to this, but what I'm dealing with now personally is that the rest of council is kind of not moving in that direction. So I feel like I'm having to abandon this idea that we might approach it that way and kind of fight for this other kind of opportunity of maybe looking at a larger increase in general. But I would just want to say I appreciate your efforts and Just Economics efforts, because it does make a lot of sense to me, but the compression hit is also quite challenging. And when I look at our vacancy list, I see it's across more than just the lowest tiers. So we have a problem up the tiers as well. And I think that's going to provide an even bigger challenge when we say, go take on $75 million in bonds, or possibly 100. And we need that expertise. But I just appreciate your perspective on it and continuing to bring it up. Maybe we can address it in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting to me when we look at 100-year cycles. In the 1920s, tourism was really big and new. We had a new Biltmore Estate, new Grove Park. It seemed like money was everywhere. And then you start seeing the displacement of working people and the burdening of infrastructure. And then the city signs up for a whole bunch of debt because it seems like the money will keep flowing. So I don't want us to fall into traps of 100-year cycles, but I am deeply concerned about where we're headed with the overlapping bid bonds and our budgeting for staff wages. So I really appreciate the deep consideration of what it looks like to give everyone a raise and bring our public safety above 50,000. So I hope everyone looked at the fullness of what Vicki with Just Economics provided.
Did you just read The Sky Club? Is that why you're telling us? The Sky Club's a great book by Terry Roberts. Talks about that period of time, and the mayor committed suicide. So yes, I'm in agreement with you that we should not repeat that cycle.
I'm actually just reading my great-grandparents and great-great-aunt Faye's writings from living here in that period, and it was just really hard and sad for everyone. And though I know this conversation has been really hard for us, I don't think we have to skip the learning from experience part.
Okay, anything else?
What if we wanted to look at a tax increase this year to get to everyone getting a higher raise? What would the steps to that look like?
So right now, we're let us, Maggie, if you would, give us until tomorrow or Monday for us to run the numbers, because I just don't want Tony to throw out some numbers and
100%. Yeah,
they not be accurate. Just let us debrief from what we've kind of heard, and then we'll get that information back to you as soon as possible.
Okay. Yep. Understood.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.